Marvel is full of all kinds of teams, both good and bad, extraordinary and subtle, popular and not so popular. Today, I think it's high time we shine a spotlight on our favorite teams of losers and rebels who should be treated better. Now, when we say that these teams deserve better, there really isn't a better example than the Harvesters. After the events of the superhuman Civil War, Iron Man created the 50-State Initiative. This was essentially an initiative to set up government-funded superhero teams throughout each of the United States. Some of these teams were already established groups of heroes, but for some states, completely new groups composed of local heroes were formed. The Sunflower State, Kansas, gained its team in the form of the Harvesters. This new team was made up of pretty strange heroes that we hadn't seen before. Topeka, who led the team, was basically just a super soldier. Then there was Pioneer, who had the power of the plains, as she put it. Sunflower, who was literally a human sunflower who got stronger under direct sunlight and appeared to have a high degree of durability. There was Meadowlark, who could fly and sing to hypnotize people. And then, of course, there was Grainbelt, whose body was literally made of grain that he could control. Why did they deserve better? Well, this team's only claim to fame came when they faced off against a zombie clone of the hero Hyperion, who is basically the Marvel equivalent of Superman, and he utterly destroyed each member of this team. They did not stand a single chance. Only Pioneer just barely made it out alive by raising up an entire herd of undead cattle and trampling the zombie Hyperion, who then succumbed to mad cow disease, and I wish I made that up. Now, most of you nerds have heard about the Skrull. This alien race has been a nuisance in Marvel Comics ever since their first appearance in Fantastic Four #2. The Skrull members who fought the Four at this time ended up hypnotized into believing they were actually cows by Reed Richards, and they shapeshifted into and were stuck as cows. What I'm sure Reed did not anticipate is that these Skrull cows ended up finding themselves in a butcher and turned into beef. This Skrull beef was then consumed by regular old Earthlings. Now, while a good majority of people did not survive the Skrull cow meat, a select few did, and had the Skrull's adaptable DNA code transferred into their human cells, resulting in a condition called Skrullivoria-induced Skrullophobia. The infected individuals gained the ability to shapeshift like a Skrull, but also developed an intense irrational fear and hatred of the Skrull, and they came together to form the aptly named Skrull Kill Krew. Fueled by their irrational impulses to destroy the Skrull, they helped prevent the Skrulls from attacking other people, but they even faced off against other villains like Baron von Strucker. It's just a really unfortunate way to gain a superpower. Now, X-Force is the awesome Black Ops X-Men related team with characters like Domino and Cable and Cannonball and Wolverine and Warpath, and it's awesome. But for a short little while, it was decidedly not awesome. In the year 2000, X-Force got cancelled and rebranded into what eventually would become Ecstatics. This team isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The original team was made up of the mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit with Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who was basically a squid man. But all of those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of Ecstatics who have passed away over their history, with only 9 surviving. 9. Okay, so we have Ecstatics, we have X-Force, we have the X-Men of course, and we have a whole handful of other X-branded teams, but some mutants aren't considered presentable to the outside world because whatever their mutation is, it has been deemed either gross or terrifying by the wider Marvel human society, or they are mutants who are just bitter about being persecuted for being mutants. This group banded together, named themselves the Morlocks, and headed down into the Morlock tunnels beneath New York City. Already, without anything happening to them other than their mutations, these characters have it rough and deserve better. But then, to add flame to the fire, the Morlocks undergo tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, with one of the worst being the event known as the Mutant Massacre. where Mr. Sinister and the Mutant Gambit put together a group of villainous characters and led them into the tunnels to commit, well, a massacre. And it was all because another villain, Dark Beast, created some of these Morlocks, and Mr. Sinister didn't like that. Sometimes it takes the smallest of things to bring people together, and while that may sound like an extremely beautiful sentiment, I'm saying it in relation to the villainous team known as the Headmen, who it seems came together because each of their powers revolves around their heads in one way or another, and it's honestly kind of unsettling in my opinion. Putting their heads together, figuratively, not literally, these scientists sought out world domination, bringing them into conflict with the Defenders, She-Hulk, and Spider-Man. The quartet consisted of Arthur Nagin, their leader, who had his head transplanted onto the body of a gorilla, Ruby Thursday, who replaced her own head with an organic computer capable of changing shape, Gerald Morgan, aka Shrunken Bones, who accidentally shrank his own skeleton, including his skull, so he basically just had really baggy skin, and Chandu the Mystic's head had been transplanted by Nagin onto a number of different bodies throughout his time, making him quite the versatile little guy. Not gonna lie. The Champions of Los Angeles were the first West Coast based superhuman team. They formed like all great superhero teams do, with several heroes happening to just meet by chance against a great threat. In this case, that threat took the form of the Greek god of death, Pluto. The group consisted of two former X-Men, Angel and Iceman, the Greek god of strength, Hercules, who I swear is super underappreciated, Johnny Blaze, the original Ghost Rider, and the Russian spy Black Widow, who led the team. After defeating Pluto, the Champions of Los Angeles, or just the Champions, decided to stick together as a team. Warren Worthington III, aka Angel, was the wealth behind the group, and with his money they bought their own Quinjet and named it the Champ Jet, which I find hilarious because over time the members of this team started to become embarrassed by the entire idea of the team as a whole. Both Iceman and Angel called it an embarrassment and a nightmare because they had no idea what they were doing. But still, they had a few more adventures working with X-Force, and they had some additions to the roster with Black Goliath, who aided the team in a scientific aspect, and another Russian female hero, Darkstar, who was originally there to capture Black Widow but ended up changing sides instead. I'm gonna be honest, I kinda love the lineup of this team. I'd read it if they came back. Now you remember how the Headmen all came together based on their head-related powers? Well, I'll do you one better. How about the Death Throws, whose powers and names all have something to do with commonly throwing stuff. The leader, ringleader, threw together teammates Bombshell, Knick-Knack, Oddball, Tenpin, and Throwdown into a group that honestly works really well together, juggling their various different throwing instruments between each other. They worked so well together, in fact, that they were even hired to and succeeded in breaking the villain Crossfire out of prison. However, once they had taken Crossfire to their HQ, they discovered that Crossfire was broke. His assets had all been impounded, and he had lost all of his useful connections. These guys did battle with characters like Captain America, Crossfire, Hawkeye, and even Loki of all people, who stopped the group from robbing the Big Top Casino in Las Vegas. Their Marvel wiki even lists their origins as, and I quote, a joint effort to perform criminal and mercenary acts while using juggling expertise. I honestly can't even believe this group of villains exists and that they haven't been able to get Bullseye into their ranks. What the heck's up with that? Okay, of all the teams on this list, I think that Horticulture may be my favorite. For starters, they look so cool, but then you find out that it's actually just a bunch of older women between the ages of 64 to 81 who are all expert botanists and want to bring Earth back to a more pristine time when it had about 7 billion less people on it, and it was ruled by plant life. I just love how they use their regular names, and the names just kinda suit their ages and interests in plants. We got Augusta Bromes, Lily Lamus, Edith Scutch, and Opal Vetiver. Gosh! What a bunch of winners. But yes, that's right, these ladies want to basically exterminate most of the Earth's human population and bring plants back to the forefront, specifically flowers. This goal brings them into conflict with the X-Men in 2019's X-Men number 3. Beyond biological modifications believed to have been made to themselves, the women of Horticulture are experts at manipulating the environment to suit their extinction agenda, and they're also computer programmers selling software to Orcus to monitor Krakoan gateways. They did get pretty handily walloped though, so Second to last, as part of kid-centric Star Comics, Marvel decided to release a team composed of of animal superheroes, which is cool. But the difference here is this team of animal heroes were cybernetically enhanced super intelligent animals with absolutely massive arsenals and awesome exoskeletons, which is much cooler. And they fought for the environment, which is even cooler. This team was made up of Boomer, a kangaroo, Lionheart, a lion, Soar/Slipstream, an eagle, Reckless, who was a bear, and Dr. Echo/Surfstreak, who was a dolphin. Does it sound kind of ridiculous? Sure, but it is awesome. This team was co-created by Multicore, spearheaded by Dr. Randall Pierce, and it was all part of Weapons 2, which itself was the second project after Weapon 1. Who would have thought? Also known as Project Rebirth, also known as the project that created Captain America. Now some of you may know that these projects were part of a bigger thing called Weapons Plus, who would eventually go on to create Man-Thing, Luke Cage, Nuke, Typhoid Mary, Phantom X, the Stepford Cuckoos, and of course, Wolverine. So most people know that they aren't exactly a good group of people. While their original series was cancelled after only a few issues in Wolverine and Captain America Weapons Plus #1, those two heroes investigated an abandoned Weapons Plus site where they found the team kept in hibernation tanks full of liquid. The bear, Reckless, was freed from his container but attacked the duo, resulting in his passing. And last up today, first ever introduced in 1989's West Coast Avengers Volume 2 number 46, the Great Lake Avengers formed after Mr. Immortal put out an ad in the local personals seeking men and women of action to join forces and form a team of super friends. This managed to catch the attention of Avengers members Hawkeye and Mockingbird. In order to help them out, the Great Lakes Avengers were trained by the duo and the rest was history. The team is made up of pretty much Z-list heroes, with the main lineup usually consisting of Mr. Immortal, Doorman, Big Bertha, and Flatman. Naturally, as a sort of running joke throughout Marvel Comics since their introduction, the team goes up against some of the zaniest villains and situations I have ever seen, and they don't do particularly well. But I'll be darned if I don't have a soft spot for this team. The funny thing about most joke characters and teams is that they almost always end up actually doing some pretty extraordinary things from time to time.
Sleepwalker is his name, but there is a possibility that it actually isn't. He is part of the Sleepwalker race. They're kind of like dream police. They protect beings that are sleeping from the evil entities that want to invade their head. Sleepwalker was tracking one of these beings into the mind of Rick Sheridan, but the villain tricked him into getting trapped inside Rick's mind. Sleepwalker's story is really similar to Venom's story. Human gets attached to alien, and they have to learn to live with each other. The difference here is Sleepwalker can't separate from his host. In fact, the only time he was able to exist outside of his host was when Rick was sleeping. If Rick was awake, Sleepwalker was just kind of in the back of his mind. Rick did eventually figure out that he had an alien attached to him, and he didn't take it very well. He figured that if he never slept, the alien would never come out, and that went just as well as you think. He did eventually just pass out due to exhaustion. At a certain point, the pair come to realize that they aren't getting out of this and form a hero-host bond, and Sleepwalker is able to exist when his host is awake. Sleepwalker's powers include warp gaze. He twists and alters the shape of physical objects, including people. Thankfully, he is a good guy and refuses to do that to a person because it would cause way too much mental trauma. I think Sleepwalker should get either screen time or just even more panel time because he is a proven asset. Not only is he a great fighter, he can also enhance mental powers just by being near the person with them. That means Professor X, Jean Grey, Doctor Strange. You cannot tell me Sleepwalker wouldn't be an excellent addition to a super team. Plus, apparently, according to Rick, his voice sounds like Vincent Price, the horror star of the golden age of Hollywood and the guy who did the Thriller monologue. As you can see, I am very passionate about my guy. Now switching over to the DC hero that I will fight for day and night until I die, the Heckler. I can't even begin to explain how upset I am that his series was cancelled early. That's pain, but it ended on a cliffhanger and I was just starting to get interested, and that is double pain. The Heckler debuted in the 90s and he does have 90s comic energy to him. He disappeared for a long time after his series was cancelled at 6 issues. His appearances after that were just like cameos, but then in 2022, DC released One Star Squadron. That series was a team of D-list heroes created for hero-for-hire business. So you could get a superhero for like your office Christmas party or a birthday. Heckler was part of this business, but he looked very different. I am grateful the character was brought back, but I miss the original. The original Heckler was drawn in a very specific style. His comic was really interesting to look at. It was very experimental though, so I get DC not wanting to do that again. I really liked the original comics because they were a parody of hero comics. The creators wanted to make the Bugs Bunny of the hero world, so Heckler had no actual powers. His power was be annoying until the person defeats themselves. Maybe I love him because I can relate, I don't know. Heckler deserves better than to just fade into obscurity. Dazzler is one underrated hero who is just starting to get the major recognition she deserves. She was originally a known character, but then she had a brief period where she kind of fell off, but now she is back and shining brighter than ever. Marvel has been putting in the work on their end, putting her back in the pages and up on the screen, but I would argue a lot of Dazzler's recent mainstream fame has to do with Taylor Swift. Say what you will about Taylor Swift, but you cannot deny that her name holds power. Barely anyone outside of like nerd fandoms knew who Dazzler was, but then Taylor Swift might be playing her and suddenly Dazzler's the talk of the town, which she deserves. Dazzler is a pop star and she converts sound that reaches her body into light. The light can manifest as a blinding flash or a blast or lasers, holograms, mists, and like her name, dazzle people by making her body sparkle in a way that throws off someone's mind. Dazzler has many fans in the Marvel Universe, including Kitty Pryde, Juggernaut, and Colossus. She also has fans outside the Marvel Universe, including me and you. It's nice to see this underrated hero finally getting the love that she deserves. I am about to put up missing posters for this team because where did they go? Hcia is the Justice League, but for Mexico. Hcia is Spanish for justice, so it's pretty on the nose with that one. They first appeared in Suicide Squad, Most Wanted, El Diablo, and Amanda Waller 5 and 6 as the team. Then a few team members were in some Superman comics, and that's it. The team leader is El Dorado. He's Superman but Mexican, pretty much. He can fly, he's strong, he can teleport, and do minor telepathy. There are 3 other members on the team. Akrata, a skilled martial artist and acrobat capable of teleportation due to the Mayan artifact she wears. Then we have El Muerto, he's undead, which makes him hard to kill. Finally, we have Iman. He wears a suit of armor that gives him superior strength. There are connections between Hcia and the Justice League. El Muerto used to idolize Superman, and Iman received a scholarship from Wayne Enterprises. Iman and Batman also share very similar trauma. Each individual hero has had a handful of appearances, the team has had 2. I think that they are a neat team and they should get more chances to show off together. Lorna the Jungle Queen has been MIA for too long. It's time to bring her back and give her a slight writing redemption arc. Lorna, as a character, super interesting, pure of heart, strong, great role model. The comics she's in though, they contain some depictions of cultures that are not great and are very outdated. Her series is from the 50s. Lorna is very cool though, and I think Marvel could bring her back quite easily if they wanted to. Lorna is all about protecting her home. She lives in the African rainforests. She works with and saves the wildlife there from poachers. Lorna tries to never use guns while fighting because they might jam or break, but she can always rely on herself. If she did use a weapon, it was likely a spear because she trained with them a lot while growing up. It appears that Lorna doesn't have any supernatural abilities, she's just a really strong and smart woman. If the MCU or comics wanted to give her some spotlight, they could definitely bring her in using Wakanda, considering that both locations are in Africa. I know that Red Bee isn't everyone's favorite, but I can't get through explaining his story without laughing, and that makes him a winner in my books. Red Bee's thing is he fights using trained bees he keeps in his belt buckle. He apparently even has a favorite bee that is special. That bee is Michael. Michael can pick locks and sting multiple times. Red Bee isn't completely helpless without his bees. He is trained in acrobatics and hand-to-hand combat and law. I would like to share with y'all a fun fact from his wiki page. In his brief career in Hit Comics, which is 24 issues, the Red Bee was hit in the head hard enough to knock him unconscious a minimum of 14 times. Were the bees really there, or was he just hit in the head too many times? The character was recently seen fighting alongside Peacemaker. I hope that with all the parodies and spin-offs DC has been greenlighting, Red Bee finds himself in there somewhere. rare. Moving into the movies though, the MCU, I think the Eternals deserve better. The concept of the Eternals is so interesting, the characters and their histories are so cool, they had such an incredible cast, but the movie fell flat for a lot of viewers. It has a 47% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, which is literally a tragedy. I was really looking forward to them, and it's my personal opinion that Eternals should have been a show. One episode per member of the team to properly explore their backstory and emotional weight in the conflict, instead of trying to force all of that into 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know this is a controversial topic, not saying the movie was a dumpster fire, but I think a show would have suited the team better. I would love to hear if you agree with me or not, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. To the person though who did comment on one of our past videos that Captain Comic is always forgotten, I see you, I hear you, and today we will remember him together. Captain Comet is also known as Adam Blake, and he is a mutant for DC. When you hear mutant in the superhero context, most people think Marvel, but DC has some mutants too, Captain Comet being one of them. He was born way before his time, 100,000 years before, in fact. He is described as the first man of the future. The old Adam and the new version of Adam, they have very similar origin stories. When he was born, a comet flew across the sky, emitting radiation. The radiation triggered Adam's cells into multi-genetic cell growth, which caused him to develop mental powers. As he grew up, he realized he was not only mentally strong, but physically too. He was indestructible. Other powers of his include telepathy, teleportation, poison immunity, telekinesis, clairvoyance, photographic memory, and he can just read people really well, know how much of a fight they will put up, how they're feeling at any given moment. Truly, this guy is a powerhouse that I would love to see more of. Marvel has quite a few cowboy characters at varying degrees of popularity, but Jim Gardley seems to be at the bottom of the pyramid despite being Marvel's first cowboy. Many think it was Two Gun Kid, but it was actually Jim, better known as Masked Raider. There are a few reasons why Jim has faded away from the cowboy spotlight, but the big one was his series wasn't as long as other Marvel cowboys, and he was active in the 1930s and 40s. With the internet, you can find and read the stories now, but imagine trying to track down Marvel Comics Volume 1, Issue 1 without the internet. Impossible task. So poor Jim faded into obscurity. The Masked Raider got his name because he wore the Eternity Mask to hide his identity. The Eternity Mask is not a toy. It gives the user cosmic equality. Whoever wears it is automatically equal in power to whoever they might fight. There is a catch though, the user can't have evil intentions. The mask also leads heroes to where they are needed, sometimes preventing problems before they start. The Masked Raider inspired a secret society that formed using his message of fighting the lawless and bringing justice to the oppressed, so that's his legacy in the comics. It's a shame that a character that was the first Marvel cowboy and the wielder of a pretty major magical artifact is barely remembered. I just recently discovered someone called Diamond Jack, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about him since. He sounds like one of the most powerful heroes DC has ever created, and yet they haven't really done anything with him since his short run in the 40s. Diamond Jack was once just a guy. Then he met an old magician who gave him a magical diamond capable of making its user physically strong and mentally beyond all ordinary mortals. Jack got the diamond as long as he promised to help people, and it really is just that easy. You too can become a superhero just by talking to your local magician. As Jack is a pretty sturdy guy, but average, the ring is where it's at. It can transform objects like projectiles into flowers, weapons to candy. He turned a witch's magic book into a recipe book titled 1000 Ways to Cook Spinach, so clearly he has a sense of humor. The ring can also create convincing illusions or even conjure a brand new physical object from thin air, like when he gave himself a sword or that time he created a parachute. Jack is shown to be pretty much unstoppable, so I would love to see him brought back and see if he would still be that powerful today, even when placed next to some of DC's current most powerful beings.
Not all Avengers are given the same treatment as Iron Man or Captain America.
But that doesn't mean we don't love them and want to see them rise to that level.
It's somewhat weird to think about the fact that this person on our list was an Avenger, but He was, and honestly, he was kind of great on the team, even developing a relationship with Janet during his time there. That's right, we're talking about Alex Summers, aka the mutant hero Havoc. Havoc has had a complicated relationship with heroics throughout his life. Initially, he wanted nothing to do with being a hero, but found himself dragged into the superhero lifestyle anyway, due to him being a mutant and constantly getting tangled up in stories involving the X-Men. However, I feel like being on the Avengers actually suits him better as a character, also allowing him to get out from under his brother Scott's very long shadow. Havoc is very much a middle child, and I feel like often gets stuck as a result of this, so it was nice to see him come into his own. In general, I feel like Havoc simply doesn't get a lot to do in the comics. He was with Maddie during Dark X-Men recently and was heavily featured in Hellions, but in both of those stories he kind of feels like a side character somewhat. And in Hellions we basically were just dealing with all of Alex's trauma, which, you know, while important and I did love, don't get me wrong, I would still just like to see Alex when he's in his power a little bit more. And lately that's been missing somewhat from the comics with his character, I think.
Leave the saving of the world to the men? Silverclaw doesn't think so. Silverclaw is the daughter of mortal Jamie Santiago and a volcano goddess. The goddess gave Silverclaw to her father as a gift. She was to be the protector of his village. As Silverclaw was growing up, her powers began to show. Those powers are kinda like shape-shifting, specifically regarding animals native to South American jungles and forests. She doesn't need to fully transform her body into an animal to take on the characteristics of it. She assumes a form that combines her human appearance with the animals. She's done this with jaguars, monkeys, pumas, and more. Silverclaw was headed to America to meet up with Jarvis, oddly enough. She was his sponsor child. Her flight was hijacked, and the only way to ensure the other passengers' safety was if she agreed to help the bad guys. Eventually, the Avengers show up, defeat everybody, Silverclaw explains her side of the story, and the Avengers let her join so she can help them track down the hijackers. They thwarted the bad guys, and Silverclaw remained on the team.
Honestly, I just really love Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, and lately I feel like we haven't gotten enough of her. Unlike some of the others on our list though, Janet has at least gotten her dues in the past. I mean, she is also one of the original Avengers, but in the modern comics landscape, I feel like both Jan and her adopted, sort of in a weird way, stepdaughter, Nadia Van Dyne, have both fallen by the wayside.
We know Hawkeye, he's clearly doing well if his hit TV show and mainstream fame is anything to go by, but he had to learn all his skills from somebody. One of his teachers was Swordsman. He met Hawkeye while working in the circus. Swordsman's circus act was shockingly sword and knife based, and when Hawkeye finished his sword training, they were often a duo. Swordsman is an Avenger now, but he wasn't always a stellar citizen. He has robbed people and left people for dead and gotten himself banned from multiple countries and originally joined the Avengers as a double agent, but he eventually had a change of heart due to his heart. During a period where Swordsman is taking a required break from the Avengers, he ends up working for this gangster, and that's where he meets the eventual love of his life, Mantis. Mantis said she can fix him, and she did. Now Swordsman has the self-respect needed to 100% leave crime behind, and the pair rejoined the Avengers. It went well, but it didn't end well. He died. It was super tragic. Mantis yells, "Darling, it's a moment." He comes back in the form of a sentient tree eventually, then dies again, then is revived again during the Chaos War, then died again. He deserves better than that. All that character development for what? He also has a really cool sword. It can shoot energy rays.
I personally love Monica a lot. She's just a strong member of the Avengers who honestly very rarely gets enough love in the comics. However, it is important to note that there are pockets here and there for us Monica fans, but I do wish we just got more of her in general, especially as a leader, which I think Monica is pretty great at doing. Monica Rambeau was a leader of the Avengers for a while. Monica Rambeau was a leader of the Avengers for a while in the 80s, but her time in that role was pretty short-lived due to her being tricked and manipulated into giving up leadership by Dr. Druid after she was fatally wounded in a battle. Not only did Monica Rambeau lose her role as leader, but she was also zapped of her powers at this time because that happened in the confrontation that also wounded her, prompting her to give up her leadership role. So she was all around severely nerfed at that time, and also mainly because Dr. Druid was working to betray his teammates this all happened. Monica would also be known as the first woman to use the mantle of Captain Marvel. That's right, a lot of people think it's Carol Danvers, but it was actually Monica. But after leaving the Avengers would lose that name as well and go on to become Photon instead. Now she had to give up her name because Captain Marvel's son appeared kinda out of the blue in the comics and wanted to use the name for himself. Fortunately, Monica would go on to lead the Next Wave team later on in her career, but she would also later find out that she had been manipulated into this role by Beyond. And even after fighting back against the Beyond Corporation, who is admittedly evil, she would have her personality altered due to this traumatic experience. So yeah, it's been a very mixed bag for Monica throughout her history, sadly. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of the things that I love to read her in, she also kinda gets messed up in.
One thing about me, I love Sleepwalker. I think he is so neat, and trust and believe if I can get him on a list, I will. The MCU judges books by their cover because at first, multiple Avengers think Sleepwalker is a villain. That is not the case. He is a good guy. Sleepwalker is not just his name, but also his job. The Mindscape is a dimension that is in all sentient things, including you and I. It has beings in it whose sole purpose is to be evil and make people go insane by invading their mind. The Sleepwalkers stop this from happening and protect the minds of innocents. One of these Sleepwalkers was tricked by a longtime enemy into entering the mind of Rick Sheridan. They fought in the dream, but when the villain escaped, our hero was trapped and bonded to Rick. Eventually, Rick learned of his Sleepwalker buddy, and the two became co-inhibitors of Rick's mind. The Sleepwalker used his time on Earth to fight the evil entities from the Mindscape that materialized in the physical world. He was a member of Operation Lightning Storm, and being a part of this initiative when Quiet Man started causing problems, Sleepwalker got recruited to the Avengers to help out.
Quasar never gets enough love in my opinion. I'm not sure if it's because he has a similar vibe to Captain Marvel, or even at times in a weird way, not really power related, but Wonder Man. And both Marvel and Simon are just put above Wendell for some reason. But ever since I read more about Quasar in Dazzler, which I highly recommend you check out if you haven't already, I became more intrigued by his character, and then as a result disappointed when I learned he wasn't really as prominently featured today as some other heroes are, for some reason. Granted, Quasar, while niche, has still been in hundreds of issues. Still, I wish he had his own book today, or at least appeared more regularly in someone else's solo series, or was just like on a team. Honestly, I miss the days of the old Dazzler comic. I loved him as a supporting character there. I just want to relive those days. Also bring the Dazzler series back, it's so good.
The rootinest tootinest cowboy in the Wild Wild West, Two Gun Kid. He isn't technically a cowboy, but he sure does look and act like one. Personally, I love the musical Oklahoma and by extension the cowboy aesthetic, so to me, this hero absolutely deserves the world. He is not supercharged, he is just a guy that wanted to be a hero. He trained until he was an expert gunfighter and horseback rider. He's also a master of the lasso. Iconic. He is from the 1870s. He did all his training in the 1870s and grew very, very famous. Think like Annie Oakley, Billy the Kid. So how did he end up in the modern era? When the Avengers were fighting time-traveling thorn in their side, Kang the Conqueror, they ended up conveniently in the same time as Two Gun. Two Gun was obviously interested in the people from the future and helped them fight. He did good and was offered a reserve spot in the 20th century, which worked out well. He could explore everything the modern world had to offer and only help the Avengers when absolutely necessary. Getting homesick for the homestead, he returned to his era eventually, but continued to help the Avengers whenever they visited. Two Gun Kid is part of the reason heroes like Hawkeye and Angel came to be. Hawkeye was inspired by Two Gun's heroism and took up the style when he became a hero, and Angel, before he was Angel, was Two Gun's doctor in his old age. Two Gun made sure to tell him about the heroes of the future, and those stories ended up inspiring Angel to become Angel. Two Gun Kid had an impact.
Look, I saw Madam Web, and it was an experience, to put it lightly. Of course, for this list, we're talking about Julia Carpenter's Madam Web though, not Cassandra, but to be honest, I wasn't too happy with how she was featured in the film either. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of why it was bad here because that would be honestly a whole other video. In fact, I've actually done two on that subject on my own channel, but trust me when I say it's a disaster of a film, okay? Just trust me. It's just so bad, and it feels like it undermines the powerful and much beloved character of Julia Carpenter, as well as honestly everyone else, but we're talking about Julia. Julia was the second woman to take up the Spider-Woman mantle after Jessica Drew, and it was during her time as Spider-Woman that she came to have a few adventures with the main Avengers team, later going on to fully join the West Coast Avengers. And I just think she's great. She doesn't get enough praise.
Hi, before I say this state name, I would like to clarify again, I'm Canadian, so please don't make fun of me, I will say it wrong. The man from Massachusetts, Dane Whitman, the Black Knight. The Black Knight is a mantle that gets passed down, so there have been a bunch, and not always good guys. The Black Knight, before Dane, his uncle, was a villain and requested that Dane not be. Good news, Dane wasn't, he joined the Avengers. He got on the Avengers' radar by telling them Magneto captured 2 of their teammates. He doesn't join right away, he spends some time at his family's estate first, a castle. You learn pretty quick that the Black Knight has a very specific medieval aesthetic. The Black Knight travels by Pegasus, and he has this really cool weapon called the Ebony Blade. The Ebony Blade is a double-edged sword, but seriously, it gives the wielder basically immunity and can cut through anything. But it will slowly corrupt its user, that's the downside. Black Knight officially joined the Avengers after defeating Kang together, but he had been an ally to them long before that. He was a great asset to the team. He wasn't just a great fighter with epic transportation, he was also incredibly intelligent. Black Knight might finally be getting the mainstream fame he deserves. He was in the MCU movie Eternals, played by Kit Harington. He wasn't like a major character, but at the end we see him gain possession of the Ebony Blade, so it's pretty clear it's him. And with Kit Harington in the role, it's definitely something to look forward to, even if we don't know when we'll see the character again on screen.